Memoirs of Aunt Martha. When I got home that afternoon, the first thing I saw was the package on my front stoop. No return label, no note, just a pale blue box with a red ribbon sitting there like a gift from a ghost. It was 3 days before my 68th birthday, and I thought maybe Ethan remembered this year. I brought it in, set it on the kitchen counter next to the grocery bags, and didn't open it. I had work to do. The pork butt needed marinating. The Parker House rolls had to rise. I had planned the menu down to the last olive in the classic potato salad. Even bought the fancy paper napkins with golden leaves printed in the corners. You know, the ones people throw away, but you buy them anyway because it makes the table feel like someone cared. Ethan hadn't been home in almost 9 months. He texted on holidays, called when he needed a tax form from when he lived here 5 years ago. I still kept his old room the way he left it. Same bookshelf, same Denver Broncos helmet in the top drawer. Dolores from next door was helping with the chairs and tablecloths. She asked if Ethan was bringing anyone. I told her yes, his fiancée, Sky. I said her name carefully like I didn't want it to break in my mouth. Dolores nodded the way people do when they're not sure if you're proud or trying to hold it together. I had spent a whole week getting the house ready, cleaned the windows, polished the family silver, pulled weeds from the flower beds so the front looked welcoming. I even put a bottle of Cabernet in Ethan's room just in case he wanted to feel at home. And still in the back of my mind, there was this tiny voice. The one that whispers when you've already forgiven someone too many times. It said, "Don't get your hopes up, kid." But I did. I always did. The day before the party, I got a call. Ethan's voice hurried and flat. "We'll be there tomorrow, Mom. By the way, we want to share something big with you. Got some plans to discuss." That was all he said. Plans. Not birthday wishes. Not how are you feeling, not even a hint of excitement. Just plans. So, I smiled at the phone like an idiot and told him I couldn't wait. If you've ever thrown a party hoping someone would just show up and look you in the eyes like they used to, maybe you know what I mean. The morning of my birthday, the sky turned gray like it forgot how to shine. I finished setting the last of the chairs by 9 a.m. The roast was in the oven, the peach crisp cooling on the windowsill. The house smelled like something warm and old-fashioned. I had even worn my deep blue cardigan, the one Ethan once said made me look like someone from a Norman Rockwell painting. By noon, a few neighbors came by with cards and hugs. Dolores helped pour lemonade and passed out plates. Everyone gathered in the backyard under the string lights I had put up the night before. I was refilling the sweet tea when I saw Ethan walk through the side gate with Sky on his arm. She wore white, a long flowing dress with silver trim, not a maxi dress, not casual. She walked like the place belonged to her. Ethan gave me a side hug, said, "Happy B-Day," and stepped away before I could respond. He didn't compliment the food, didn't ask how I'd been sleeping. He just looked around and nodded like he was scouting a venue. They moved to the center of the yard and I thought maybe they brought a gift or had something sweet to say. Ethan tapped his glass with a fork. Folks stopped eating. Some clapped. I sat down near the table, not quite sure what was about to happen. He cleared his throat. Said he wanted to make an announcement, that he and Sky had been dreaming of their wedding for months, that they found the perfect spot near Lake Tahoe. Rustic barn, mountain view, everything elegant but simple. He used that word more than once. Simple. Then he smiled and said they were excited to share the journey with family, that this wedding would be a reflection of love and legacy. And since legacy begins with the people who raised you, he turned to me and said they hoped I would support them in a meaningful way. It took me a second to realize what was happening. He said the venue deposit was time-sensitive, that catering required half up front, that with all the moving parts, the total was somewhere around $52,000. Then he smiled again, paused for applause that never came, and added that he and Sky felt it would be most fitting if the woman who taught him to believe in dreams was the one to help fund this one. The yard was quiet. I nodded, I smiled. I said I would think about it. I did not say I was stunned. I did not say this was my birthday. I did not say I had $600 in checking and a cracked Ford I couldn't afford to fix. I just picked up a paper plate and walked inside to refill the deviled eggs. 2 days after the party, the house felt like a stage left in a hurry. Napkins still folded in a basket, a half-eaten cake under foil, a vase of tulips slumped from their own weight. I moved through the quiet like I was careful not to wake something. Ethan came by that afternoon with a plastic folder and a paper cup of Starbucks. He said he only had a few minutes. That Sky was waiting in the car. He sat at the table like it was just another Wednesday. Slid the folder toward me, and tapped the top. Said these were tax documents, that he needed my signature because I still owned the house and it made things easier for his filing. I asked what changed. He said he was filing jointly now, that Sky needed some information processed before their loan applications went through. All standard stuff. I looked at the papers, mostly numbers, addresses, small print. He had marked where I needed to sign with post-it notes, yellow tabs, 4 of them. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. Ethan picked at the corner of the folder like he was in a hurry. He glanced at the oven clock, said something about needing to beat traffic on I-285. I took the pen. My hands didn't shake, but my gut did. I signed where he marked and handed the folder back. Ethan gave me a quick hug and was out the door before I made it to the sink. I stood there a long time, listening to the sound of their car pulling away, wondering why everything had started to feel like a transaction, like kindness was being itemized, like motherhood was a service you closed out with a tip line. That night, Sky called, said she wanted to swing by and help me declutter the home office, said she had a gift card for a donation pickup service. Her voice was too cheerful, almost rehearsed. She came alone, brought oatmeal raisin muffins and herbal tea, complimented my kitchen towels, asked how I felt about letting go of old things, said starting fresh felt powerful. Her eyes scanned the bookshelves while she talked. She boxed up a few old binders, a lamp, some trinkets from Ethan's high school days, said less clutter helped with clarity. That's when she found the deed folder in the file drawer. She picked it up and ran her fingers along the edge like it was something delicate. Said nothing, just nodded and placed it quietly into the box marked, shred or scan. I didn't stop her. I just stood there watching the way her hands moved like she'd done this before. Later that night, I looked at the kitchen counter. The yellow tabs were gone, the coffee cup was gone, the folder was gone, only the feeling remained, a kind of silence I didn't know how to name. Like something important had been touched in a way that could not be undone. It happened on a Thursday night. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that sneaks through windows and makes floorboards creak like they are trying to warn you. I had just finished my shift at the public library. It was volunteer work a few hours a week, but it gave me something to dress up for. I carried a brown paper bag with soup from the local diner. I remember the weight of it, heavy on one side because of the cornbread. When I reached the porch, something felt off. Porch light was dimmer. A wind chime I never bought hung by the door. Then I saw it. A new keypad lock, where my brass knob used to be. I pressed my palm to the door, knocked once, then twice. I heard footsteps. Ethan opened it. He looked rested, cleaner than usual. He didn't step aside, just stood there with one hand on the frame and the other on his hip. Behind him, I saw Sky sitting on the couch, flipping through a home decor catalog. Ethan said the house was now under new paperwork, that things had shifted and he needed time and space, said he hoped I understood. He didn't use the word eviction, didn't raise his voice. Just calm. Almost polite. The way someone speaks to a stranger in a waiting room. I told him I needed to come in and get my things, my coat, my nightgown, my photo albums. He said most of it was boxed already. Said it was on the porch. I turned. 2 cardboard boxes unevenly taped sat by the railing like forgotten deliveries. He said they couldn't let me stay because it complicated things with their financial process, that it was better this way, cleaner. Sky never looked up from her magazine. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I picked up the boxes, stacked them on one arm, and carried the soup in the other. Walked down the steps without turning back. By the time I reached the end of the block, my wrist ached. I stopped under a street lamp. One of the boxes started to sag from the bottom. I sat on the curb and opened it. Inside were some sweaters, 2 pairs of socks, and a plastic grocery bag, holding my toothbrush, and a jar of face cream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scroll my phone for a ride. I just sat there, the cold biting through my coat, trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't rage I felt or even betrayal. It was something quieter, a slow unraveling, like a thread had been pulled from the center of me and the rest would take its time to fall apart. I stood up, walked toward the bus stop with the bags in hand. Somewhere behind me, my porch light flickered off. The bench was cold, but I sat there for hours. Every time a bus passed, I let it go. My fingers were numb from the wind and holding the boxes, but I stayed. I wasn't waiting for a ride. I was waiting for the panic to settle into something manageable. By the time the street lights flickered into orange glow, I realized I had nowhere to go. Not really. Not in a way that made sense. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want my voice to crack and explain something I didn't fully understand yet. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I saw a familiar shape walking across the lot behind the bus shelter. Dolores, same coat she'd had for years, same cautious steps. She was holding a takeout container, balancing it like a tray. I had forgotten she lived near that part of town now after moving into a senior duplex. She didn't ask questions, just looked at me for a second, then turned and said she was walking home and I could come if I wanted. I followed without a word. She held the door open with her hip and placed the container on her kitchen counter. Chicken and dumplings, still warm. The next morning, she laid out a cot in her sewing room, said I could stay a few days. I folded the blankets neatly, lined my shoes under the window, and placed the boxes by the wall. I didn't unpack. We didn't talk much, just enough to know when the coffee was ready, or what channel the weather came on. It felt quiet in a way that made space for my thoughts to land. On the third evening, I sat with my paperwork, the few things I had taken when I left, insurance letters, bank statements, the small folder I kept with copies of the house title. My name was still there on the printout from last spring. My signature dated and clear. Something pulled at me, not anger, just a weight behind my eyes that wouldn't go away. I took the pages to the kitchen table. The light above it flickered slightly, as if reminding me not to miss a detail. I remembered Ethan saying the forms he gave me were for tax purposes, that I had to sign for filing, but the more I looked, the less it made sense. The form numbers didn't match any IRS documents I recognized. Some sections were blank. One had a signature block labeled transfer of deed. I stared at that for a long time. I got up, found the magnifying glass Dolores used for her crossword puzzles, held it over the signature line. My name was there, but something looked off, like it had been printed, not signed, or maybe copied. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I had proof, but because I had doubt strong enough to hold shape. For the first time, the fog around what happened began to lift. Something wasn't right, and I was finally ready to stop pretending it was. The next morning, I pulled the folder out again, spread the pages across Dolores's dining table, while the kettle hissed in the background. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for clarity. The signature line still didn't sit right. It had my name, but it lacked something. Pressure marks, ink flow, human irregularity. There was no curve, no hesitation, no pause before the loop in my M. It looked right at first glance, but now in daylight, it looked too perfect. I asked Dolores if she still had that old file of employment records we used to update together. She nodded and fetched a binder from her closet. We flipped through subfolders until we found a form I had signed 2 years ago. Same pen, same paper stock. That signature had a softness, a tilt. The one on the new papers had none. We said nothing, just kept flipping, comparing, watching, as the difference became louder, without a single word being spoken. That afternoon, Dolores made a call to someone she knew, Walter Jenkins, a retired attorney who now helps seniors with estate reviews and fraud prevention. She said he wasn't flashy, didn't like headlines, but he noticed things most folks missed. He came the next day. Quiet man, buttoned up with a wool scarf and hands that moved slowly but precisely. He didn't make promises, just asked me to walk him through everything from the moment Ethan brought the folder. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. He asked me to describe the sequence of events, when I signed, what I understood at the time, how the documents were introduced. He listened without interrupting. Occasionally, he scribbled notes in a small notepad with green lines. When I was done, he looked at the pages and nodded once. Then he turned to Dolores and said it was enough to begin a review. He took the documents with him and said he'd be back in a week. No speculation, no alarm, just process. That night, I sat on the cot with a blanket around my shoulders. The heater clicked on and off, filling the room with soft hums. I didn't feel angry, not even afraid. I felt something more solid, like a door inside me had closed, and another had quietly opened behind it. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. I could see the reflection of myself in the glass, the lines near my mouth deeper than I remembered. But there was also a stillness in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about the ground beneath me, the way I had let people talk over me, smooth things over, call things complicated, when they were just dishonest. For the first time in a long time, I wanted the truth. Not to win anything, not to punish, just to be able to look at myself and know I didn't let this part of my life disappear without a voice. It was exactly 6 days later when Walter returned. Same wool scarf, same quiet presence. He carried a folder that looked thicker than the one I gave him. He didn't sit right away, just stood by the chair and asked if we could talk privately. Dolores gave me a small nod and stepped out to her garden. Walter opened the folder slowly. Inside were several documents I had never seen before. He had requested access to the county registrar's records and pulled every deed transfer, mortgage release, and notarized file connected to my property for the last 18 months. One of the transfers bore a stamp from a mobile notary, name printed in the corner, but the timestamp didn't match the day Ethan visited. It was dated 3 weeks earlier, the same day Sky brought me those muffins and boxed up the office closet. Walter showed me a copy of the signature comparison report, a document his colleague, a handwriting specialist, had helped analyze. My name had been traced using digital lifting, then reprinted and pressed onto the form. It had all the technical signs of forgery, clean lines, even pressure, no pen flow. He slid over a printout from my joint account. Ethan had made 2 large transfers labeled staging expense and pre-wedding advance. Both withdrawals were within a day of the forged signature filing. Total came to just under $24,000. Walter said nothing more. He just looked at me with the kind of silence people use when they know what comes next will change everything. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I only nodded once and placed my hand on the folder. The paper was warm from the sun through the window. That night I wrote a letter, just a short one. No blame, no apologies, just a statement. I said I had initiated legal steps to reverse the property transaction, that I had documentation and representation, that any further communication from Ethan or Sky should go through Walter. I placed the letter in an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox down the street. It had no greeting, just a name and an address, my son's. Dolores came in later with a pot of soup. She didn't ask questions, just sat beside me and told me her hydrangeas weren't taking well this season. After she went to bed, I stepped outside. The wind had picked up. Clouds slid across the sky in slow, determined shapes. I stood on the porch and breathed in the chill, not like someone bracing for a storm, but like someone who had already made it through one. I looked out at the yard and knew I wasn't retreating. I was positioning, not for revenge, not for anger, but for something steadier, a correction, a quiet realignment of what had gone off course. And for the first time since the night on that bench, I felt rooted again. Not to a place, but to myself. The next week passed like slow water. Walter was preparing paperwork. Dolores kept baking like the oven was her way of holding things steady. I spent mornings in her garden trimming stems, cleaning up brittle leaves, letting my hands move without needing answers. One afternoon, I sat on the edge of her porch with a lukewarm mug of coffee and scrolled through a local community board. Dolores had shown me how to check the town's announcements and news threads. That was when I saw it. Sky had posted a photo, wide angle, my old living room, same window seat, same antique lamp I picked up in 1994 at a church rummage sale. She was standing in the middle, hands placed on her stomach, like she was already dreaming of baby showers. Behind her, a banner in cursive read, "Home begins here." The caption said something about a fresh start, about building a home full of warmth and vision. She added 3 heart emojis and tagged Ethan. His comment was pinned to the top. He wrote that this house symbolized growth, that they had stepped into a new chapter with confidence, that family was about who showed up when it counted. I stared at the photo for a long time, not because it shocked me. I had already accepted what they had done, but something about the way they smiled into that camera made it clear. They didn't feel guilt, they didn't even remember the porch light or the soup in my hand, or the boxes stacked crooked beside the steps. None of it lived in them, and that's when I felt it shift. The grief wasn't sharp anymore. It didn't stab. It spread quietly like spilled oil. But then it settled. Didn't drown me. Just coated the edges of what used to age. I closed the screen and went to the kitchen. I made tea. I sat with Dolores and we watched the evening news. She talked about weather. I nodded. Neither of us mentioned what I saw. Later that night, I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo from a birthday long ago. Ethan was 6. He was holding a cupcake with too much frosting. I was kneeling beside him that day. He had called me a hero. I remember, because he whispered it into my hair when no one was listening. I folded the photo back into the drawer. That boy didn't live in the man who posted on the internet about legacy and real estate. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't write. I didn't call Walter. I just let the stillness do what it needed. By the time the sun rose, something had cleared, not like a storm ending, more like fog lifting to reveal where the road truly led. And I knew then, with the kind of quiet you only earn through sorrow, that I was no longer waiting to be included. I was already free, they just hadn't noticed. The county courthouse was older than I remembered. Brownstone exterior, tall, narrow windows that didn't let in much light, the kind of place that held its own silence. Walter and I walked in through the east entrance. He carried a small leather folder. I had nothing in my hands. We didn't speak much on the way there, just polite remarks about traffic and how early the leaves were changing that year. But the quiet between us wasn't nervous. It was settled, the kind that forms when both people already understand their purpose. Inside the hearing room, it was just a few people seated in hard wooden chairs. No jury, just a property dispute hearing, informal but official enough. Ethan sat on the far side of the table with a woman in a blazer who looked 10 years younger than him, but far more composed. Sky was beside him, tapping her heel like she had somewhere better to be. I took my seat across from them. The clerk called the case number. The judge entered. We stood, then sat. Walter began his opening with the same calm tone he always used. No drama, just a layout of the events. He presented the evidence cleanly. The mismatched signatures, the date discrepancies, the banking withdrawals, the timeline. When he placed the expert report on the desk, he did not look at Ethan. He looked at the judge, as if none of this was personal, just facts that needed daylight. Ethan's attorney objected only once, about the handwriting expert's credibility. The judge overruled without pause. Then Ethan was asked to speak. He cleared his throat twice. His hands were clasped in front of him. He said that he believed the papers were legally signed, that he acted in good faith, that everything was intended as part of a family arrangement. He kept using the word arrangement. Sky said nothing. She didn't even lift her eyes, just kept her arms crossed, her face turned slightly toward the wall. I said nothing during the hearing, not a single word. I sat with my palms resting on my knees, and watched the light from the window shift slowly across the floor tiles. When it was over, the judge announced a decision would be mailed within 10 days, but the weight in the room had already changed. No one looked victorious, just quieter. As we stepped outside, the wind tugged at my coat. I didn't ask Walter what he thought. I didn't need to. I had been in that room. I had watched the way Ethan couldn't meet my eyes. The way Sky's silence finally said more than her posture ever had. We walked back to the car. Walter opened the door for me. I sat down and stared ahead as he started the engine. I wasn't waiting for a verdict. That room had already given me something better. It had let me sit across from the people who erased me and not disappear. And that, in its own quiet way, was a kind of return. The decision arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A plain white envelope slipped into Dolores's mailbox between a gardening catalog and an ad for window treatments. Walter had told me it would be brief. Property disputes rarely got dramatic in writing, but the words were clear. The deed transfer was reversed. The forgery validated by expert review. All rights of ownership restored to the original title holder, me. I stood on Dolores's porch, letter in hand, and watched the clouds move slow across the sky. There was no cheer in me, no outburst, just a calm that settled like a coat placed gently on the shoulders of someone who'd been cold for too long. Walter called an hour later. He asked if I had read it. I said yes. He said the court clerk would forward the ruling to the county registrar, and within a week the records would be corrected. I thanked him. He didn't speak much after that. Just said he was proud to stand beside me, and that I had done the hardest part myself. The next morning I took the bus. Not to go home, not yet, but to visit the credit union downtown. I had papers to submit. I moved the account tied to the property into a new trust, one with no second names, no shared access, just mine. From there, I stopped by the real estate office, not to sell, not immediately, but to list a notice. The house would no longer be available for occupancy. Legal occupancy had ceased, 30 days to vacate, documents posted, process official. That afternoon, Sky called. Her voice was clipped, low. She said the letter had arrived, that the county had posted notice. She asked where they were supposed to go. Her tone was not pleading. It was sharp, laced with inconvenience, not sorrow, not shame. I said she should speak to Walter. Then I hung up. That night, I sat with Dolores on her porch again. She handed me a folded towel, still warm from the dryer. Said she always liked how clothes felt right after they finished tumbling. Said warmth should be simple, not earned through begging. I thought of the living room. The one in the photo. My photo. The window seat. The lamp. The paint color Ethan once helped me pick when he was 14. I thought of the way Sky had posed beneath that banner about fresh starts. And I realized they had never expected me to return. They had expected me to vanish, to disappear into silence like a leaf swept under a rug. But I hadn't. I had stayed quiet, not absent. I had stepped back, not surrendered. And now they would pack boxes of their own, tape them shut, load them into a borrowed U-Haul, and watch the porch light dim behind them. This time it would not flicker. It would shut off on my terms. They left on a Sunday morning. No loud trucks, no arguments, just 2 cars and a short U-Haul hitched behind. I watched from the corner bench across the street, where Dolores and I sometimes sat when the lilacs were blooming. That morning, she stayed home. Said this was something I needed to see on my own. Ethan came out first carrying a lamp wrapped in a beach towel. He didn't look around, just walked straight to the open hatch and slid it in beside a suitcase. Sky followed with a box labeled kitchen. Her hair tied up in the same scarf I once gave her as a Christmas gift. I doubt she remembered. They moved like people in a hurry. No final walkthrough, no pause at the threshold, just trip after trip, until the steps were clear. The banner from the living room was gone. So was the porch swing, but the wind chime still hung from the gutter, tapping soft against the siding like it hadn't realized anything changed. I stayed on the bench. No one saw me. Or maybe they did and chose not to react. Either way, I didn't move. At one point, Sky stood near the driveway with her phone tapping furiously, her mouth tightened. Ethan said something low and sharp. She dropped the phone into her purse and pulled her coat tighter. Then she climbed into the passenger seat without looking back. The U-Haul pulled away first. Ethan followed. Neither car stopped at the stop sign. Just turned down the hill and disappeared past the old post office. I waited until the street was quiet again. Then I stood up and crossed slowly. The grass was dry beneath my shoes. I walked past the mailbox, up the path, and onto the porch. No key in hand, just the letter from the court still folded in my pocket. I sat on the top step. Let the silence settle. The house looked smaller than I remembered, older, but it breathed easier without the weight of false presence. The kind of weight that makes you think something is whole when it's already cracked through the middle. I didn't go inside, not yet. I let the air speak first. Let the quiet prove it had returned. It wasn't celebration, I felt. And it wasn't closure. It was something simpler. It was space, and it was mine again. The next morning, I opened the front door with a new key, not because I needed to lock anyone out, but because it mattered that this time, the key was mine alone. Inside the house breathed a different rhythm. Walls, bare floors, clean corners, empty. It looked nothing like the photo Sky had posted weeks ago. No banners, no filtered light, just honest space. I started in the kitchen, opened cabinets, wiped down shelves, found 2 mugs left behind, one chipped, one clean. I kept the chipped one. Something about its imperfection made it feel familiar. The living room took longer, not because of the mess, but because I let myself move slowly. I sat in the window seat, ran my hand along the sill. The paint had faded, the cushion flattened, but the view out front was still the same. Birch trees lining the sidewalk, mailbox at the curb. Nothing dramatic, just continuity. That afternoon, Dolores came by with a basket of apples. She stood in the doorway, glanced around, then smiled like she knew I didn't need words. She didn't stay long, said she had dinner to check on. I walked her back to the porch, then stood there a while after she left. I thought about writing Ethan, not to forgive, not to explain, just to say I hoped one day he would remember something good. A birthday, a song on the radio, a ride home after a bad school day. But I didn't write. Some memories are safer left unshaken. That night, I made soup. Ate on the porch with the light above me glowing steady. No flicker, no shadows, just warmth. It wasn't the same house anymore, and I wasn't the same woman. But somehow, in the quiet, we had both returned to something true, and that was enough. If this story found a place in your heart, I hope it reminded you that silence does not mean surrender, sometimes walking away is the loudest thing we can do. If you've ever been made to feel invisible or had to rebuild alone, know that you're not alone in that quiet. Let me know if a moment from this story echoed something in your own life. And if you stayed until the end, thank you. Your time here matters more than you.